Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System is one of 3 games to bear the name, with the other 2 released for the Sega Genesis and the original NES. And out of the 3 games in the Tournament Fighters micro series made to capitalize on the fighting game craze that was going on in 1993-ish, it's probably the best of the bunch, as it were. But more than that, out of all the bandwagon-jumping fighting games released on the Super NES that is not a conversion of an equivalent arcade game, Tournament Fighters is perhaps one of the few instances where it's a pretty decent fighter on its own merit. It's one of those fighters from that early age of fighting games that actually holds up over time and is generally a fun but challenging fighter to play. Tournament Fighters boasts 10 playable characters, with 2 boss characters waiting in the wings but playable via code in 2-player mode. Aside from the 4 Ninja Turtles, obviously, you also have quite a varied selection of fighters from a variety of sources. Shredder's look is based more on his initial appearance in the original Mirage comic series from 1984, well, before the explosions and the worms and beheading and stuff. From the old TMNT Adventure series from Archie Comics, you have Wingnut, Armagun, and War. Chrome Dome hails from the 1987 animated series with slightly more color.
And finally, you have Asuka, an original character added in for a female flavor who was originally intended to be that lady from that Turtles movie everyone hates. Oh wait, I forgot, I have to be more specific these days. Whatever, who cares, moving on.
Tournament Fighters crosses a significant number of items off the checklist of Street Fighter II knockoff fighting games. You got a number of fighters at your disposal, each of whom possessing a number of basic and special attacks that can be executed through the usual joystick motion and button commands. The fighting is fast and fierce and allows for quick combos to be performed, and there's even an option to adjust the speed of the game, so you could play a little faster game if you want. The character balance is pretty solid, all things considered, with each fighter feeling and playing somewhat differently from each other. Even the 4 turtles play somewhat distinctly from each other and boast a distinct flavor. Controls comprise 2 punch buttons and 2 kick buttons, and it's all on the face button, so no awkward reaching for the triggers. They never come into play here unless you fiddle with the button configuration. In any case, control in general is tight and responsive. So if you know how to perform your chosen fighter's special moves, you shouldn't have a problem pulling them off here, especially the ultimate attacks, of which each fighter has 1. Basically, you're building up this mutagen meter by landing blows on your opponent, blocked or otherwise, and you have to keep up with that offensive because the meter empties out bit by bit over time, and it takes a while to build that meter, although if you happen to be close to defeat, you can earn a little more energy to fill in this meter. Once your meter is filled, just press Fierce Punch and Fierce Kick and let the pain fly. And yes, it's pretty much the same command for everybody. No double quarter circles or anything silly like that. No recycled attacks either, it's all unique stuff. Somewhat. There are 4 modes of play in Tournament Fighters: Tournament, Versus, Story, and Watch. Tournament is your standard arcade mode where you pick a fighter, fight off against the rest of the cast, you beat the bosses, you get your character's specific ending. Pretty standard and straightforward stuff. Versus mode is your usual 2-player versus mode. There's Story mode, an alternate single-player mode where the Turtles have to rescue April and Splinter from the bad guys. Essentially tournament mode with a couple differences. Aside from only the Turtles being playable here, there's additional dialogue bits between fights. There's an exclusive boss here, essentially a grayish turtle clone that serves as the obligatory mirror match, and ultimate attacks are disabled in this mode. And finally, you have Watch mode, which is just that. You watch a match in progress. Not much else to it. Like some other fighting games of the time, you can only get the full ending on skill setting 3 and up. Unlike other fighting games of the time, however, you can only fight the final boss Karai at skill level 3 and up. Anything less is met with April or Splinters flat out telling you that you're just not good enough to face Karai. The difficulty can be overwhelming at first, as the computer does tend to fight a somewhat smart game at times. Some would call it cheap, but that's just the way it is. But eventually, through training and perseverance, you will conquer all. Or maybe you'll just continue sucking. Either way works, I suppose. TMNT Tournament Fighters is perhaps one of the nicer looking fighting games to grace the SNES. Certainly no visual spectacle that's mind-blowing or anything of the sort, but on the level that's closer to the slick Street Fighter II ports than the second-rate garbage that graced the system. It's that nice looking at least, and that's a good thing. Honest. The backgrounds are varied, colorful even with the faded cloudiness of some backdrop items, lively, not exactly dead looking, and littered with numerous cameo appearances from folks you might wish were playable characters, but that's okay. 10 fighters and 2 bosses are more than enough, and they also look nice and animated. I like that the turtles are depicted with a little more grit that's closer to their comic book origins while retaining their vibrant colors. I like that Shredder looks more threatening, some of the characters look menacing here, but Karai kinda baffles me. I mean, what is this? The mugshots aren't amazing, some of the background cameos are colored incorrectly, and this opening introduction where all the turtles are seemingly talking at the same time is jarring. I can only imagine this being depicted in a cartoon, and so can you because we're not playing that bit. Sound in Tournament Fighters is also top-notch stuff. You have some nice, impactful sounding sound effects that is impactful and impacting feeling. I should probably recycle that last bit whenever I need to describe sound effects in a nice sounding fighting game, but I digress. The voice bites sound a bit on the rough side, but at least each character sounds somewhat distinct, even if it's the same 2 or 3 people providing voice samples. At least I think it's 2 or 3 people, I'm not quite sure. Kinda sounds like it, but whatever. Gotta say, Tournament Fighters on SNES has the best music out of the 3 versions, with its highly energetic rock tunes and some surprising varied pieces sprinkled here and there, depending on the stage and the mood. The kind of tunes that stick in your head long after gameplay is over and done with, so good job sound guy whose name I don't know and for all intents and purposes probably can't pronounce. Have a gold star. Out of the 3 console releases to bear the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters moniker, the SNES version stands tall as probably the best of the trio, and it's a solid fighting game that still holds its own to this day. Would it be a stretch to say that this is probably one of the best fighters on the Super Nintendo, considering the top-notch stuff you have on there in that category? Maybe, maybe not, but I could certainly buy into that claim. It's a slick little fighter with varied fighters, tight controls, polished gameplay, variable speed. Production overall is high quality stuff, and it's just a fun game to sit down and kill an hour or 2 with. Even if you don't care for the Ninja Turtles brand or the franchise, but you just like a good fighting game on the console, Tournament Fighters is one worth checking out. It's not too pricey, it's not as much of a rarity as the NES version. On a whole, a superb fighting game on the console, just a fun time to be had by all.